The Giza Plateau. Some of the largest pyramids in Egypt are located here. These pyramids were built using a technology and tools unknown to us. Their technical purpose is not questioned by many researchers. Of course, there are many hypotheses, but most likely there are some kind of energy objects. But let's face it, the technologies involved here are thousands of years ahead of the current level of human development. And perhaps we simply cannot even comprehend what they were actually needed for. However, in some cases we can already draw analogies with modern technologies and make some more or less realistic conclusions. And the structures that surround the pyramids help us with this. And as is well known, any energy facility needs infrastructure, auxiliary supply installations and entire stations. And we can find a whole multitude of such facilities around the pyramids. Reservoirs, roads, even pipelines. A whole series of hydraulic treatment facilities with a full cycle of water preparation for some technological processes that obviously took place in the pyramids. As we know, for example, nuclear power plants today need a constant water supply for cooling systems, and the requirements for water there are very strict, and the purification facilities are quite serious. And today we will look at just one of these structures, which all of the existing ones has reached to our days in the best condition. This is the so-called Lower Temple of Khafre. It's located next to the Sphinx. This is what we see from the backside. It consists of huge stones, many of which weigh more than 50 tons. Once there was a granite facing here. We can see these notches. These are traces of joining with the granite facing. And here is a very interesting stone, just a gorgeously processed granite element. And to me, as a hydraulic engineer, this reminds me of nothing other than an element of passive coastal protection. Nowadays, such elements are made of concrete. And this shape is simply ideal for damping coastal waves. And people developed this shape for a very long time, made special stands for this. And here we see the same shape. That is, those who did this, they knew a lot about hydraulic structures, and moreover, they did it from stone. And it's much more difficult to do this from stone. Another such element, simply ideal, and there are many of them here. Well, not all of them, of course, have survived to this day, and this structure obviously had these coastal protection elements. And for what purpose? Well, so that naturally it wouldn't be destroyed by waves. And we know that the level of this structure is exactly at the level of the Nile. There are huge stones here. These are megalithic, just polygonal blocks with many angles. In general, in the best traditions of ancient Egypt. And we see again this corner as if cut by something, which again tell us that these blocks were processed and leveled after installation using plasticine technology. And these massive stones are very reminiscent of hydraulic engineering port structures made of massive blocks, where no fastening elements are needed. They simply stand due to their own weight. It's worth nothing right away that the so-called temple has a very strange shape. There are two entrances, which are then combined into one room, which smoothly flows into another room. If the columns can still be explained somehow, then this forked shaft from very narrow rooms on the left side, and in addition very strange curves of some rooms around the corridor, which goes quite sleepy upwards, this is already very difficult to explain. Therefore, we will not beat around the bush, and it's worth understanding right away that this doesn't look like any temple. This is a purely technological structure. We see some sphinx placed here on this reconstruction. Naturally, they were not here initially. So let's call things by their proper names. And initially, this was a pumping station for the initial purification of water and its supply to the second station, which was located near the pyramid itself. It should be noted that the water that was needed for the technological processes was technical, not drinking, which means that special requirements were needed for it. And this is at a minimum, so that scale doesn't form in the water. There is no sediment, slow growth of corrosion, of course. Naturally, so that there was no turbidity and solid impurities. Of course, it's unknown what qualities of water the builders of the pyramids needed, but presumably it's possible that the water was also purified from dissolved gases, metal salts, and disinfectants were also needed to remove bacteria. And most importantly, it was necessary to remove nitrates, which are what give hardness to water, which has a very bad effect on its quality. In addition, it was necessary to add reagents. For example, caustic potassium was added to the water for nuclear power plants, due to which radioactive nuclides with a very fast half-life were formed in the water. And this was necessary for natural purification of the circuit from radioactive impurities. Well, looking at the diagram of this structure, we can assume that there were firstly grids for the primary purification of these Nile waters, and we know that the Nile waters were quite muddy, and there may be some vegetation, animals from which the water should be purified first. Further, there were probably some pumps here, which already supplied water to the first chamber. There is a setting tank here. We will of course see all this further in the photographs. Most likely there were some more grates or some kind of maybe membrane filter further. Of course, it's hard to say now. Next, we have this interesting structure of three oblong rooms. There are three openings at the top, three hatches where most likely reagents were poured, dosed here. Further on, there were apparently devices that mixed these reagents with water and transported them here. This was the first stage of chemical water purification. Then electrodialysis treatment came into effect. Apparently on the one side there were cathodes, on the other side anodes, and the water was purified from nitrates. Well, and then the water flowed up through the pipe. Here was the pump. Most likely there was a service tunnel here that led to the second tier. There is a window here, through which perhaps some pipelines of electric cables passed. Perhaps the pipe wasn't exactly like that. Presumably, the pipe was still the same, made of stone. But this is only an assumption. Nevertheless, near the Pyramid of Unas, I did find something very similar to an element of a pipe. Perhaps I'm mistaken, but something tells me that the builders who made everything from stone could have made pipes from stone as well. Moreover, we know that they tried to make everything out of stone, and this applies to the dishes that can be found in museums, made in an incredible way. And in general, all the buildings, all the elements that they could, they made everything out of stone. Roofs, drainage systems, and in general everything they could. And they didn't seem to use wood at all. And if we look at this length of pipelines that should have been there, and these are 500 and even 600 meters, and they extended to each pyramid, then there should have been serious metallurgical enterprises here, traces of which haven't yet been found. And this was the first part about hydraulic structures of the pyramids. Watch the continuation and subscribe to the channel.